Thank you, Robin. It's such a delight to be here in collaboration with RAPS presenting a webinar on transforming regulatory compliance with artificial intelligence. And we all know how much the keyword artificial intelligence is become ubiquitous. And I am honored to have the best panel we could have put together. And I'd like to welcome our panel. I'd like to welcome Ann Vu, Don Ellis, and Liz Haynes. A little bit about them if you have not interacted with these leaders in the past. Ann Vu is the Senior VP of Chief Quality and Regulatory Affairs at ZimVie and has over 25 years of experience in the field of regulatory affairs, quality, management, and clinical affairs. She has held leadership positions at other leading medical device companies such as Steris, Johnson & Johnson, and Zimmer Biomet, and brings simplicity, innovation, and leadership to the medical device regulatory compliance space. Don Ellis is currently the VP of Quality and Regulatory Affairs at Reba Medical. Don has over 30 years of experience in the global regulatory space. Don was the head of RA for coronary products for Philips Image-Guided Therapy business unit. Don has led RA teams in the fields of in vitro diagnostics. He has experience with cardiovascular, implantable devices, surgical implants, and minimally invasive devices. And Liz Haynes has over 2 decades of experience in regulatory affairs, quality management, and clinical operations. She led RA teams at some of the leading medtech companies such as Zoll Medical, Straumann, Conformis, and Transmedics. Liz is also a lecturer and professor at Northeastern University. She holds a lot of certificates in addition to her obviously bachelor's degree in business strategy, women's leadership, and executive leadership from institutions like Cornell and Northwestern. Thank you so much to our panel for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be here and provide some insights into RA leadership, about some of the challenges faced. I have a bunch of questions, and then what we'll do is at the end, we'll allocate some time to also have the panel address some of your questions. Once again, thank you, Ann, Don, and Liz, for being here. I want to start the conversation off with a simple question, which is, what are the key challenges that you see RA teams are facing today?
So thanks, Priya, for the introduction. It's great to be here. And I want to start by saying thanks for RAPS hosting this for us today. It's a great opportunity to connect with colleagues around the globe. I think from a key challenges perspective, I see the ability to manage change as one of the top challenges that I think all of us are facing. So yes, there's changes in the regulations and standards, and I think there's good ways to stay on top of those things, but how you translate that into what ultimately is going to become your submission and your point of proof, your clearance, right? And then architecting that with your business partners as you navigate the implementation of the change throughout your entire organization.
Don, you have experience, you essentially joined a much smaller organization, a well-funded startup, if you will, but you recently joined Reba, but you were with Philips, a very large medtech company. What do you see? What's your perspective on this? Coming, the RA challenges faced by companies like Philips versus a smaller company, are they the same? Do you see differences?
Well, a couple of different things I would share. I think that handling the increasingly complex regulatory environment is a challenge for any organization, regardless of how many people they have involved in the process. The world continues to promulgate new regulations and new standards and new guidance documents, and therefore new submissions need to be created based on change. The other piece and one of the reasons for looking at a RIM solution in the first place many years ago. Regulatory affairs is now increasingly part of the audit process and the audit nonconformity process. And so having business tools that allow us to demonstrate that we're executing our function well and in compliance with laws becomes incredibly important now. There are consent decrees and there are 43 observations in the United States. I think most of the panelists and most of the people attending are familiar with MDSAP audits where they are evaluating your work as a regulatory professional and understanding whether or not you've executed the appropriate reviews in a timely way. And having business tools and business processes that are now scaled to an ever more invasive is the word I'll use this morning. Regulatory complexity is one of the things that's front of mind and one of the reasons for looking for solutions that can do more and help us as an organization execute our tasks but stay in compliance.
Mm.
And
Great.
I think also the climate of wanting to globalize our products and being able to take the knowledge that we have about them through whatever might be our first regulatory submission and looking for the extensibility of that to the other markets so that we can partner with our organizations to get our products to market as quickly as possible.
Liz, how about you? And I know you've also come from varied backgrounds of working for not startups, but smaller companies, but then also working for decent sized mid to large
Yeah,
corporations.
definitely. So I think, what both Anne and Dylan have mentioned are critical aspects. And even more so when you are trying to become a business partner to the organization from a regulatory standpoint, and then also try to drive that business strategy of, where do you go from a globalization standpoint and how do you leverage your first document or your first submission, such as what Anne said, to go global. You need to understand what the market has for you and where are going to be your struggles and your constraints and how do you get past those, but also how do you leverage what you have to be able to, be more efficient and establish in some areas KPIs, key performance indicators, so that you can understand how quickly you're going to target, because that's going to be the number one question as a business partner. Well, how quickly are you going to get me that global entry into, let's say, China or some other complex area where you could leverage potentially your 510K or your CE dossier, or I guess now technical documentation. And so how do you use all that? How do you navigate that? How do you become efficient so that the organization can be efficient and you're turning around your market access quicker?
So what are the themes? There are three different themes we're hearing, which is going to help us have segue into other questions in conversation, which is Anne mentioned change assessment. Don mentioned this new concept of, well, it's not a new concept, but definitely a lot more audit, and then becoming a better business partner and looking at your position as that within the RA team and the organization. That being said, what do you see as the emerging trends that have the potential to reshape the regulatory landscape, or what do you foresee as the challenges? We talked about the challenges today, but as you foresee in 2 to 3 years with the technology and where the current landscape is, where do you see that? Will the challenges remain the same? Do you foresee them being completely different in 2 to 3 years?
I'll jump in if that's okay. So I think you're going to see some of the challenges still remain, but I think what you're going to see now is we're moving away from harmonization. Even though we consistently talk about global harmonization, we're moving away from it. I mean, if you look at EU MDR compared to FDA, compared to Switzerland, UK, like everybody's creating their own regulations and requirements. And so I think having something that can help you understand, or having methods, again, maybe KPIs, whatever. I push the KPIs only because it's an easier way for my teams to track and understand kind of what are the more important things that we have to get done as a regulatory business partner and as a business partner to the organization. but making sure that we have the means to understand where's the next shift happening. How do we get proactive at it? How do we influence? Can we influence from an industry standpoint? How are we going to use things such as AI to help us from a regulatory quality, even in some cases clinical aspect? Because we're looking at clinical evaluation as becoming a really hot topic lately, as well as post-market surveillance. So how do we start leveraging tools to be able to target such a broad spectrum of country requirements that we're now going to be facing in the coming years? And the whole concept of global harmonization, it's something I teach at Northeastern. We're moving so far away from it. I don't know, Dawn and Ann, if you see the same thing, but we keep talking that we're trying harmonization, but it seems like we're just going on a completely different path from that. And so how do we become more efficient?
No, Liz, I think your comments are wonderful, and I couldn't agree more that while we have a top-level conversation as industry on wanting to standardize on, a standard technical document structure from, discussions 20 years ago, that's not what we are living with today, and I don't imagine that we're going to go back in that direction. You touched on a couple of areas which I think are amazingly challenging in the differences. I think many of us who are going through the EU MDR process or have completed our journey through the EU MDR process as regulatory professionals are now responsible for and have to manage two areas that are not necessarily in our wheelhouse as kind of professionals as you grow up, but are clearly in our domain now. So risk management is a central component of how we have to run a business, and the multiple factors that go into making a risk management evaluation and doing that on an annual is how I've got it written in my quality management system, and I'm going to imagine that's consistent with the rest of the panelists in the industry. How do you look at our risk management documents? How do you look at our clinical affairs documents, Liz, since you brought it up, to understand how our products are performing clinically and collect all the feedback from prospective clinical trials for the products that require them, or user information from the products that may not, and evaluate that, manage it, assemble it, reassemble it so that it's in the right format, structure, content, and available to the regulatory authorities in all of the markets. So I see those as key trends. I don't think the industry is going to go backwards and go back to the days when 510Ks were labeling and a couple of preliminary drawings. I believe that the world will continue to look for manufacturers to provide increasing levels of support that says that their products are safe and effective and belong on the market. And therefore, we need to have the tools to be able to manage that. And to your point, Liz, the tools that can understand what that information is and translate it into the submission structures for our global marketplace.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to Liz's point. If you go back in time to 2017, when EU MDR was the thing, and it was intended to be, standardizing, everyone is going to have this common technical documentation, and we're going to build dossiers that have all of the things that foreseeably could be leveraged around the globe. And you take a step back to where we are today, and everybody thinks they're special. We've got the British version, the Swiss version, and then even the country specifics, if you look at Europe in particular. And I think the key is trying to find those common denominators that you can push across the different regulatory requirements around the globe, acknowledging that everybody does believe that they're special and they have to be different. So I think without a tool like a RIM system that's going to allow you to discern those differences, I think it's going to get even more complex and more difficult to meet those idiosyncratic differences that are out there around the globe. The days of, as Don said, a common document, I just don't see that existing anymore.
That's very interesting, having returned from a couple conferences where you have the FDA and they're all talking about harmonization with other countries, and Visa sitting on the panel and talking about IMDRF. But it's good to hear the perspective of the industry because and from us as a vendor supporting medtech companies, we also are not seeing harmonization whatsoever. We're also seeing a lot of differences in, as you mentioned, and the idiosyncrasies among countries and the regulations. So now that we know, we're all agreeing that though harmonization is being promoted, it has been with GHTF, with IMDRF, but how can regulatory teams then proactively adapt to these changes? What do you recommend as leaders?
I'll start. I think that I think it was Ann that made the comment earlier in the conversation. I think we have to recognize and we have to define for our organizations what the regulatory affairs teams are. And as we're moving forward, those regulatory affairs teams are increasingly complex in our world, even at a large multinational, and certainly with a smaller organization, startups. Our partners in the international registration market are different organizations, and being able to collaborate across the organization structures that you're required to work on is essential in order for us to be able to execute our work and to effectively manage change. You know, who's doing the change evaluations for a specific change in each of the markets? It's incredibly important to start with just defining and having tools that allow the collaboration between the manufacturer and the regulatory teams that are responsible for ensuring that the product is compliant in each of the markets that the manufacturer is participating in.
And I think it's about being able to be an effective translator for the business, right? So a regulation or standard may say, I need evidence of clinical safety and performance, and we don't have a document necessarily, and maybe this is a more obvious example than others, but there's not necessarily a document called evidence of safety and performance. We have clinical evaluation reports, we have post-market clinical follow-ups, we have things in our quality systems that we've created that fulfill those requirements, but it's making sure that those requirements are baked into the documents we already create, for one, and then being able to translate for the business, oh, what they're asking for here is XYZ. And if you provide XYZ, we're able to complete our work. But being that effective translator of the complicated technical requirement to the business is something that's always going to be essential.
Definitely. And then just jumping onto that and adding, as a leader, we all have to make sure our teams understand the requirements, right? So making sure that there's adequate training, understanding, so that they can also convey in their core team meetings, how, you know, what is the requirement? So sometimes we're not included in some of the conversations, rightfully so, at a core team meeting and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that your team is, you know, well trained, well versed, understood, getting the support, understanding that, you know, a lot of us in the industry are used to what Dawn said, the days where you put your 510K in with a label and maybe a couple of other documents and you got your 510K clearance. Now we're asking companies and other partners within the company, manufacturers, et cetera, to come up with documents that are hundreds of pages. I mean, a recent clinical evaluation that I was reading was close to 350, 400 pages. Back in the day, those used to be, I don't know, I remember writing them, they were less than 20 pages, if that. So we have to understand and be able to train not only the regulatory quality, you know, folks, but also get them to understand how do they convey it to the rest of the organization? How do they feel empowered to be able to say, I need this clinical evaluation evidence, or I need this post-market surveillance information, and here's the tools, because again, you know, with the increase in size of documentation and the complexities and all the intricacies, and let's admit it, literature searches nowadays are no longer just 5 keywords. It's close to 150 keywords that we have to type in, and you're using PubMed or other features. I know there's a lot of softwares out there, but I'll go old school and say PubMed, etc. And so you're working on trying to figure out how do you process all that and how do you do it efficiently, because we're no longer at a point either where companies are, you know, 10 SKUs, 20 SKUs. We're looking at product families, product lines, multiple indications, multiple, points of use, multiple everything. So you have to be able to pivot, be nimble, train, support, educate, etc. So as a leader, for me, that's something that I hold accountable to myself is, okay, have I empowered my team to be able to understand what's needed and be able to convey that to the organization as well?
One last comment, if I can, just building on Liz's last comment, Priya, and since this talk is about the use of AI, I think it's important in this particular question. How do we as regulatory leaders share with the organization how the game is being played in international markets? How do we understand the standards that are being promulgated and understand which apply to us and push that through the organization so that they can react appropriately to it? How do we understand the changes in regulation so that we can, again, understand whether or not the products we are currently commercializing are now considered something different and require different behaviors and different documents, or whether or not there is a brand new way of addressing how that product needs to be kept on the market. So part of this, proactively keeping a team up to date with changes is having solutions, having partners that can help us understand the ever evolving landscape that we're participating in. And that's one of the areas where I think there's great opportunity for AI to help any organization of any size understand what the competitive landscape is and help us understand how do we define a path forward that works for the organization.
Absolutely. I think unanimously, you're all saying you have to give teams tools. It's not feasible to operate the way RA teams used to operate many years ago. And that being said, we know, yes, the main objective of our conversation today is AI and technology. Now, AI has transformed industries and holds immense potential. We all know that. I'm curious, and I'm sure the audience is curious to understand, again, your perspective on where do you see it being applied? What applications in the regulatory compliance do you envision AI technologies use?
So I think there are so many different possibilities. Liz started with mentioning the clinical space. And as we're looking to meet the regulatory expectation for clinical data and clinical information, how can we use AI tools that are out there, not only to do just searches and scour, but to look for the extensibility of some of the information that's out there. There are definitely tools that could help you do that, but just being smart about how you're using the framework AI tools, whether it be GPT or something else, as starting points, as insights in developing your clinical portfolio is really important. I could think of several others as well as you're looking at product devices, all sorts of different things. And then obviously there's the AI within your own world, right? Leveraging the AI across your own submissions and using the insights that are there to build on future submissions. I could just keep going, but I'll let Don and Liz answer as well.
No, I think you did a great kickoff. I think that there's so many opportunities for AI. And again, I think it would be interesting as we continue to have this discussion for us to kind of target where the AI is intended to help us. I know that there are organizations that are focused on internal data mining. So looking at all the CAPAs, the non-compliance reports, your adverse event reports, your internal documents, and looking for that information, aggregating that information and helping you compile risk management documents that are associated with it or updates to your periodic safety updates for those who are in the European market. That's a use of AI that I think is helpful. Understanding the regulatory compliance and having the ability to scour the world of discussion from standard setting bodies that give you an update on what work is being done in a specific area of product that might be impactful to an organization is another great opportunity to use AI. I think Liz and Ann mentioned the use of AI in clinical affairs. So again, I think AI can do so many things for us if we have, tightly defined specifications for what we're looking for, and can work with vendors to align their promotional discussions with business needs, because everybody is talking about using AI. I don't know what that means in most of the promotional material that I look at on a daily basis. Exactly where are they applying the AI, and how is it helping me address an acute business need?
You both brought up great points. And one other point is using AI for, let's face it, regulatory has to have some business involvement and market analysis and so in business case development and all of those. And I'm finding that, the more I talk to people in industry, they're also using, that are regulatory individuals, are using AI to help them with those market analysis, comparing claims, being able to pull the stuff that would typically take us, before AI in tools, close to a day, if not longer, to pull together if we had no interruptions and stuff like that. So I think utilizing it for other things just beyond regulatory as well, even though we are regulatory and still providing that input and that information, it ends up becoming a business document. So how can you leverage those things? What is the right? The other thing I keep hearing is people saying, oh, I have to write some long code if I use, like Anne mentioned, ChatGPT. I have to write this long script to be able to get what I want and stuff like that. I think it's really just getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. So getting uncomfortable with AI and trying a bunch of different searches, but also realizing at some degree you also have to confirm if there's no confirmatory aspect as well.
Mhm.
And so from a regulatory standpoint, having something that also validates what you are getting from information. I can think back, a couple months ago, looking at a country and saying, okay, what's the regulation? What's this? What's that? And trying to just dig deep to find it. And you end up realizing you just keep going in a circle all day. So having a tool that could tell us, but also validate it. Here's where you can go to that country's website to validate this information, or, some type of something. Because again, at the end of the day, we're all held to some type of regulation compliance aspect. So we have to be honest and understand that we just can't make up our own country regulations, even though we
Mhm.
want to sometimes.
Right. And I think you hit on something great, that validation. So when I see you using AI in the business world, I see like three sides to it, right? One is framing a great question so that you're going to be getting the information that really is going to address the need that you've got. And then some validation of that information versus just what may be a nonsensical spew. And then the human element to that, right? So, okay, you've gotten some information out of your question. Does it meet, yes, it's been validated by a tool, but does it make sense? I still think we as regulatory professionals are obligated to ensure that what we're putting forth passes the sniff test and more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the tool is never going to replace a great brain, in my personal opinion. We have to bring logic to it. And I think the more the tool is able to validate, then that can help inform and help our team get better at understanding what good looks like in that output. But the human is still an essential piece of the output.
Oh, definitely. We still have to, as regulatory individuals, make sure it makes sense at the end of the day. I mean, I've read papers where people have used, you can very clearly see ChatGPT to write a paper, for instance, and you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, but where's the human element? Where did you put your thought, your logic, your understanding? It's one thing to, take what's in your brain and put it into something and say, okay, help me reword this to, maybe sound a little bit more professional, a little bit more regulatory, whatever it may be. But don't use AI to replace your own thinking and your own brain power. That's where we'll really start to see the demise. And unfortunately, that could be a very serious negative impact on the medical device pharmaceutical world.
I consider from the tech side, all three of you to be what we consider early adopters, believe in technology, willing to take the risk. But how, as you think of your peers, are they ready for AI? I know everyone's talking about it, everyone's talking about the tools, but do you think they have the they may have appetite for it, but do they really? Do they have the gumption to say, you know what, we're going to implement an AI, leverage technology within our system? Because as we talk to clients, we still see a little bit of resistance. They like the concept of technology, but then they want to be very careful, tread gently, and then join the bandwagon once everyone has it. And that crossing that chasm, that for even companies like us is always a challenge, they say. But I love your thoughts on that. As you think of your peers, are they really willing to then, if there are all these AI tools and technologies and solutions, will the industry really adopt them?
I'm smiling, Priya, because again, as you well know, I come from an organization that has what I'll call a standard distribution of change adoption. There are the folks that are, in the Three Sigma tail that are early adopters. There's most of the organization that's in the middle of the bell curve. And there is a very significant group that is, I am going to keep my Excel spreadsheets and SharePoint sites until the end of time. I will refuse to go. I think that that's a reality, and I think that's part of what we as leaders in our organizations, and again, I think that the people on the phone need to carefully consider is kind of where is their center of the culture in the organization that they're part of. And whether or not that organization is ready for AI-enabled tools, or whether or not part of what they need to consider in their specifications for how they're defining regulatory affairs, you stick to more traditional platforms that require more human intervention in order for those platforms to function. Again, I think that that's entirely based on kind of the culture set by the leaders of the organization and the overall culture of the organization. I'd like to say that once we kind of the dreamers, the folks that are on the front end of the adoption curve, demonstrate the utility of these solutions, then most of the organization will be fast followers and see how it can really positively impact the business. And I think that that's where this industry is. These are still great concepts that need to be proven out. We as the industry need to ask the solution providers to deliver them to us, and then we need to collectively partner with demonstrating that they can, in fact, contribute to the overall compliance position and the operational efficiency of a business.
Yeah, I think we as quality and regulatory are usually the no sayers, right? And we are usually the ones that are finding the reasons why we can't. I think our role as leaders is to find the reasons why we can. And there are so many more reasons why we can. We just need to, build the train track for the organization and help the organization head in that direction. If we want to look for reasons why we can't, we could find them all day long. But the reality is our business is changing faster than maybe we are able to do so. And it's contingent upon us to find reasons why we can't, instead of looking for the reasons why we can't looming behind us.
I would say from my, sorry, Priya. I would say, from my perspective, I see a lot of peers that are struggling with the concept of AI. And I think a lot of it just comes back to not understanding what it is and how it could be beneficial to them. And a lot of them get stuck on well, we're such a regulated industry. How can you use AI? And again, it goes back to the previous discussion we had of validation and making sure that what you're using it for is a means to create efficiency. So if you're using it to create submissions, global submissions, and you're using it, and that means, that's a great tool. If you're using it to write your risk management, okay, well, there's some brain power that needs to go into that, not just an AI output of whatever you ask it to do. So I think definitely there's an apprehension of using AI because a lot of people are unsure and because of a regulated industry. I think also, cybersecurity has a little bit to do with it. And I think we can spend a whole topic talking about that. And so I really think it comes down to getting comfortable with the unknown. Just put yourself out there and try it and utilize some home aspect that would make your life at home easier, and then just build on that to try it. Or even just, spend a half an hour just, going back and forth with maybe something like ChatGPT or whatnot to say, okay, what is the output I'm getting, so that you can understand how to write those scripts and those codes to be able to get kind of a more narrowed down approach of what you need. And then look for that validation. But again, it really it all depends on how you're going to use that AI in your daily life or in your business and whatnot, and how it can be a tool for efficiency to speed up a non-globalized industry.
And I'm so glad to have you all on the panel. I'm saying it again because I think the industry needs to hear it from the leaders themselves who are forging forward with technology and solutions within their organizations. And that being said, we do get sometimes regulatory associates or senior associates will approach, and they are always wondering how can they influence their leaders to consider technology, because you'll see teams very excited, and then but how do they influence their RA leaders?
So if their RA leaders aren't joining us in sessions like this, I think it's absolutely fair for the regulatory associate to say, hey, I attended a webinar and here's what I learned. It's okay to be the voice up. You don't always have to wait for the voice to come down, right? And I think exposure is key. But the other piece is we as leaders always are looking to ensure that we are business smart, and that we are bringing tools and processes to our teams that are going to help them meet expectations, deliver on the commitments that we've asked of them in a way which is the most effective. So one other consideration is start looking at evaluating the payback, if you will. I know we don't always want to think in terms of the monetary, but the payback on a tool is one of the easiest ways to help a leader understand its value.
No, again, my only comment, I think Ann said it well. I think that the opportunity for someone lower in the organization to influence the managers in the organization is exactly what Ann just said. Help us understand, help from your perspective, what ways that tool can help the business, and help us build the business case that supports why this is a smart way of moving. Again, I'll say as a leader here in Southern California, I can't hire enough regulatory people to do the job. They're just physically not out there. And I couldn't afford them even if they were out there to find. So we are forced as leaders to try to find the optimal way to run the organization and the most cost-effective, compliant way of doing so. I think that that's the sweet spot for these applications and why they're so compelling. And again, to your question, Priya, I think that the opportunity for the more junior person in the organization to show that they not only have the regulatory acumen, but also the business acumen to be a successful regulatory professional is to do exactly what Ann was just sharing. Help us understand what needs these tools can address and why it's important for the organization and efficient for the organization to think in ways of using and leveraging these kinds of applications.
Dawn and Ann said it all.
Yeah. And I have to say with you, Dawn, I vividly recall, it was one of your senior regulatory affairs associate who came to you with the solution, and you said
It's exactly how it happened.
Exactly, and you didn't undermine it, you didn't ignore it. And I think sometimes regulatory associates fear also that leadership, the leaders also have to be open to that conversation, and it all depends on the leaders. And I truly love how it's inspiring how awesome of leaders you are, all three of you. I've seen just Liz and her team loved her at Zoll, I can tell you that. And I know, and with you, I've met your team from Zimmer Biomet, and they rave about you. So You all have such incredible relationship with your colleagues from even your former organizations, and that speaks highly of your leadership. And we always, as vendors, also wish and hope that all leaders truly become more open to conversations and create an environment where the teams can come and have open dialogue with them. That being said, the next question I have to ask this is, now let's say the leaders are convinced, now you have to figure out a budget. How can regulatory teams create a well-balanced budget? How do you even justify a budget for such a tool? And I ask this because sometimes clients will come to us and say, do you have ROI? And then we're looking back at the client saying, do you have your baseline data? And I'll tell you, most of them don't. And I do want, after this question, get into the KPIs. And that's a problem for us, where most clients don't have their baseline data because they don't have tools for it. It was never structured where you were capturing how long does it take you on average to do submissions, what resources are you requiring. But how does one create then an ROI? Is it based on the rework? I mean, how have you done it? How do you encourage companies to allocate budget for this spend?
Practical example, and Priya, you know this well. It's actually pretty easy math, and it goes hand in hand with the KPI conversation that you're mentioning. I worked for a large multinational that needed to, based on our assessment of what the business needed in order to be successful, execute 1,000 international registrations in a calendar year. So on one column, I had the list of the registrations, the timeline that it needed to be executed, the dollars that were associated with it. And the other column was the dollars that I would need to spend to hire the people to be able to execute it manually. And then once I calculated that, how much was my regulatory information management tool going to cost me? Fully burdened. So not just the cost of the tool, but the resources to live in it. And it was really a very tilted analysis. By the time you look at the dollars to do it the old manual way and the dollars to use to leverage a more modern platform, it's a very compelling business case to move forward with technology assisting the regulatory affairs function. But if you don't know what you're trying to deliver and when that needs to be delivered in the business case for it, it's a challenge to come up with an argument to share with your chief financial officers. I need to spend, something greater than $1,000 for a software solution.
Yeah. So I think you did a great job of explaining the analysis, Don. I think the other thing to keep in mind is, if any of us have ever missed a renewal in an OUS market, I think it's very quick to support adding to your ROI assessment. Unfortunately, we did miss one, and our commercial team was absolutely livid. And, obviously it's something you never, ever want to do again, right? And add that, yes, there's the prospective registration. Just look at the cost of one renewal and what it would mean if you miss that renewal. That's another piece to add to your assessment. And Don mentioned being able to find amazing regulatory talent. That is a challenge for all of us, I believe. And I think having a tool allows you to multiply the horsepower of your team, because they're not just doing busy work. They're able to leverage the tools that are out there to really accelerate getting the submissions completed so you can get to market faster. So all of those things factor into your assessment.
I think also adding to that, so we have potentially renewals, as both Ann and Don talked about. I think there's one element too, is where can I expand from a global standpoint, and what does that look like? And so having those tools to be able to say, okay, well, here's the countries we're already in, here's where we could leverage the documentation to be able to then, go ahead and pursue, 10 more countries to be able to expand our market, really starts to show the organization that a tool can be leveraged in so many different ways, as well as, let's face it, we're all creating standard lists and guideline lists and guidances lists and everything else in between. And so being able to have that visibility of, okay, here's all the standards, the information that we have, et cetera, to be able to leverage, to be able to expand. I mean, we know things like CV scheme testing and stuff like that can be applicable, but where else can we start to see where we need to include additional country-specific requirements and testing to be able to go target a larger global market and those types of things? So there's a lot of avenues to be able to develop that business case to show an ROI for a tool. While yes, it's a regulatory tool, I think at some point in time it becomes a total company tool to majority of businesses.
Agree with you, Liz.
True. And then we have to talk about KPIs. And I know I'd love to start with you, Liz. We work together and you highly driven by KPIs, which is fantastic. It's a dream come true. When you've done that very successfully, how did you do it? How did you think of KPIs? How did you get your team to use the KPIs, right? How did you get them all on board?
Yeah, definitely. So I can hear you loud and clear when you say you reach out to companies, because I think I may have been one of those companies that reached out to you and said, hey, I need an ROI for this. And what's the baseline? And we didn't have baseline, and very transparent. I mean, I sat and started sifting through submissions and looking at, okay, what is our global international matrix? I'm sure we all have a distribution matrix. So how do we go forward and look at those? How do we compare to where the market wants to go in the next generations and all of those types of things? And then how do we hold that accountable for our teams? We all give our teams goals and objectives, but I feel like those goals and objectives sometimes are just kind of out there and we're not really sure, like, how do we support, the next generation product and stuff like that. So really it came down to how do we drive KPIs within the regulatory and quality and clinical departments. And it really came down to, what do we want to see from a growth standpoint? So if we look at existing and sustaining, we had all those in there and we could establish those and say, okay, every year we need to make sure here's, 15 registrations, they need to be 100% on time, we can have no market loss, those types of things. But then starting to say to ourselves, okay, well, if we're sitting in and being that business partner to the organization, we should be working on submissions along the way. And so how do we drive that? And the way we drove that is we said at the end of the project, when regulatory receives the last final document for a submission, we have 3 weeks to turn that around and get that into an agency. And we track those dates, the date of submission, the date of final receipt, all of those things. And that really became a strong driver. And it wasn't that we had to get 100% all the time. It was really like 80 to 90% of all submissions within reason should be submitted and driven. And so we started driving that. And that actually helped us develop even a stronger business case to not only bring in a RIM system, but bring in other tools that were helping us with efficiency. And then to Dawn's point, hiring. I mean, sometimes it was, okay, we actually don't need a senior specialist. We need more of a coordinator and regulatory to help us manage some of this stuff because we're processing it through our KPIs, et cetera. And then market expansion, sorry, I'm jumping around, but market expansion, then it becomes, okay, that 3 week, let's say US was our targeted first submission. Every 3 weeks thereafter should be the global rollout. And whether the next one is CE marking or the next one is China or Japan, whatever the next big major market, but you should be rolling out submissions every 3 weeks until the last global submission is out. And that allows us to continuously have rolling approvals coming in to be able to then hit market access and have a true global launch for the organization. So that, long and short, is how KPIs how I've driven them in the past and how they've been successful.
Yeah, I think some other KPIs that are important to us are those associated with getting it right the first time and being able to respond to the AIs or the questions that you get, right? So we've also got metrics associated with no refuse to accept, whether it be US, OUS, notified body, whatever. And the turnaround time on questions. The notified body may give you 45, 90 days for turning around a question, but you want to do so well with your initial submission that the questions you're getting are able to be swiftly addressed. So we've set internal targets that are much tighter than what the competent authority or the notified body have given us to answer those questions. And that speaks to the quality of the submission that you're turning in as well.
Absolutely. We used, that's a great example. We had no more than 2 rounds of deficiencies for PMA supplements. And really at that point in time, it started driving down the number of times we were talking to FDA, which in our industry is great to some regards, especially when it's AI requests. So definitely, how do you play on the KPIs, but leveraging the AI tools you have to be able to support those and create those efficient teams that we all need.
Don, do you have any thoughts on this as to
No,
how?
again, I think Liz and Ann said it well. Part of setting up KPIs is first understanding what your business is and what's critical to your business, and regulatory professionals looking at business success. And many of us come from compliance backgrounds where stepping back and looking at what does the organization need in order to be successful in a global marketplace isn't our core skill set. But again, increasingly, it becomes a requirement for the regulatory affairs function to have a business acumen, to be able to talk about how do we execute our role in the betterment of the organization we work for, which markets are appropriate for us to chase, what markets do we tell the organization it's not worth it, and setting our performance indicators and our goals and our objectives based on understanding the marketplace that we want to participate in now, today, and in the future. So I think Liz and Ann shared the basics of how you do KPI setting in an organization very, very well.
I do want to ask a couple questions from the audience. One of them is, the question is, oftentimes small organizations are very fund limited while they are trying to prove that their product will have a life. Do you have any recommendations for when to implement tools like this? Should it be earlier the better, or wait until you begin approaching additional geographies? And I'll just give our 2 cents. We tell clients, wait till you have additional geographies. We find there to be a good equation of either you have a large product portfolio and it's just too messy to use Excel at this point, and then yes, you should look into a tool, or you have a decent product line and you're global, you certainly need a tool. But if you're just one product, 2 countries, then we typically tell clients you don't need a software to manage. But that's our perspective. We'd love to hear yours.
As one who's just transitioning, as you shared, Priya, to a well-funded but company that hasn't placed its first product on the U.S. market, I'm kind of on the fence. So do I need a regulatory information management solution in the classical sense? Maybe not. But there are components to regulatory compliance that are really challenging for small companies to get. Do I know that I've got the right design input documents? Do I understand what I've developed? So how do I understand the world of international registrations, international standards requirements as a small startup when I don't have 100 people in my organization who are simply focused on standards management, which is a luxury that many multinationals have. So if you're not investing in a RIM platform that has all of these things as core essential elements, then it's required that you get this information in some way. And if it's not a tool, then it's consultants, which come with a dollar cost to provide these kinds of things. So again, I think it's important for us, and specifically important for the small manufacturers, to look at the entire effort and dollarize it, because there's no free ticket here. You can't submit a PMA in the United States without having a robust understanding of what the regulatory framework are, the performance requirements are, And you're going to have to acquire that as a small company in some form or fashion.
Totally agree.
There's another question. It's actually a good theme going here with 2-3 questions. The theme, well, I'll summarize it this way. The biggest concern leaders have, or just in regulatory space, the teams have, is regarding privacy, the IP issues related to when considering a commercial software, introducing that. And then the other aspect is, well, if that software has any AI, then how do you validate it?
So on the privacy side, I think there's got to be a very robust conversation with your provider to ensure that they understand what the requirements are and understand how they're using your information as well as that of possibly any others to either create a model or build a model, or if you're just leveraging your own data, right, and mining your own data. So it's really contingent upon you to have that robust conversation with your partner. And I'm thrilled to say that it's been a wonderful conversation with RegDesk. RegDesk is obviously my partner, but I can't necessarily say that I know what that outcome would be with other providers. I just don't know because I haven't had that conversation. But when it comes to validating, unfortunately, it's an evaluation of the inputs and the outputs. And just like you do any other kind of validation, you have to find a way to structure that in a way which is going to meet your own internal compliance threshold as to what data is enough for your own internal business comfort, right? Every organization is going to be somewhere else on that comfort continuum.
The only other comment that I'll make here with respect to validation is it's important for you to define and constrain how the AI will function within your solution. It can't learn and adjust everything. There are parameters that must be defined for outside of which the AI can't introduce change, because that change then is new in terms of safety and risk profile for the concept that you are bringing forward. So it's part of the job of the development team with the assistance of regulatory affairs to help define what AI is going to do within your use condition, and for you to define what it will be doing, what it's responsible for, but also what it will not be doing, and where it will be constrained.
And from the vendor perspective, most software systems are most likely validated, and QA teams can review that validation packet and then discern whether they need to revalidate any sections or whatever the internal company policy would be. And also with AI, it's not wild. It is within parameters. There's a certain application of AI, and you can then decide whether that is something you would like to apply. And most systems should be modular, where you can pick and choose the types of capabilities you want out of the system. The point is you will have a lot of flexibility. It will not be as broad as it may appear. So I know we have approaching 11 a.m. Central. Again, thank you so much to our awesome panel for being here, for providing your insights. Hope the participants found your insight, your comments and the learnings here insightful, like I did. I've taken a lot of notes. It helps us as well. Once again, thank you, and thank you, RAPS, for supporting us in conducting this webinar.